and welcome to everybody joining us for the webinar. It's just before 11 a.m, so we just thought we'd open it up and start to wait just a couple of moments while people get settled for this morning's session. Did you bring any jokes this morning, Alex, for this moment?
Sadly not. Need to up my webinar game then.
And so I'm just getting in early in terms of sharing the screen so that people know that we're in the right place at the right time. I'm joined by Alex Perret, who's going to help with the facilitation of the session this morning. But I've also put a call out to Sage Cullen on the slides, who's currently a part of our internship program and helped with some of the research behind today's webinar. And yeah, much appreciated and very helpful. So I want to make sure that I recognise her efforts there. I know a couple of we've got sort of team members down in Victoria today, up in Townsville and here in Brisbane, and the weather's quite diverse at the moment. And hopefully wherever you're joining us from, you've got a coffee or water by your side, perhaps a notepad, and just as a little bit of a process today, I have prepared a couple of slides just to provide, I guess, some of the information that we found really helpful with clients and internally of late. I'll keep the slides moving through because they can be a little bit more interesting than me to look at and listening to my voice. And there'll be a couple of moments there where really would encourage some people to participate in the questions, just so that we can get a bit of a feel from everybody joining us today. And that's where I'll lean on Alex a little bit just to help with keeping the questions streaming through and threading through. So we're just ticking over. I'm seeing 11:02 Brisbane time. Yeah, so we've got a couple of people joining us from Western Australia, Sydney, Melbourne, Queensland. Haven't quite got anybody from the Northern Territory yet, but that'd be great to get some of our contacts from up there online too. And just a reminder that for everybody that did join up to the webinar, we've got a white paper ready to share with you that sort of captured some of the insights that we captured through COVID, but then also, I guess, some of the research that we did as well around how to approach virtual working environments, particularly those of a hybrid nature, flagging some of the key benefits and risks from a mental health and productivity perspective, and really pointing us in the right direction to have a think about some of the questions and interventions that have the greatest impact. And so, Alex, what do you think? We're ready to go? Move forward, do you think?
I'd say so.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, I guess in terms of the webinar today, in terms of framing it, I guess the inspiration behind the session was very much based on through COVID, there was a lot of pushback on leadership and culture development interventions. And so I guess as a consultant in that industry, we sort of experienced firsthand, I guess, where those key needs were that actually enabled the leadership and culture interventions to persist. Also how they needed to adapt to better fit the environment. Coming into 2021, definitely in a space where there are many more organizations in a space where there is a sense that our leaders, our people are really tired after the year that we've had. We did put some of the training and development initiatives on the back burner, and we need to get on the front foot. There are some businesses that had some savings in the bank from not doing it as much last year. And then there's other businesses that are actually coming at it from, a very challenging economic perspective. So sort of we've aligned the conversations that we've been having and the proposals that we've been putting together, the interventions that we've been running, I guess, into this presentation that's really designed to help us if we're HR professionals, business owners, looking to sort of get a sense of, how should I be positioning my way of thinking to maximize the return on investment? And so at that business case phase, it's definitely where I wanted to share some, I guess, some helpful information and statistics to build that confidence that if we invest in leadership, we do get a return on that investment for our business. highlight into, I guess, a concept that underestimating what we can achieve in 3 years and perhaps overestimating what we can achieve in 1, and that can affect our budgeting as well. So some thinking around that has really helped some of our clients through this time. And then some lessons and insights that we found where focusing leadership development more at the pain points of the levels that leaders might be at, to help in formulating some of the leadership interventions, business cases and approaches that you might be taking. Okay.
Just sorry, Blake, before you go into the next slide, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A option down the bottom. I'll be monitoring it from this end, and I'll jump in and interrupt Blake's genius as he's going through it.
Thanks, Alex. That's great. And that first kickoff slide here, I guess, is sort of tapping into some of the emotional reaction that we do experience. I guess that helps us relate to the fact that most of us will find it hard to argue that effective leadership is good for business. Therefore, it's important for us to invest in the business. So whether we look back into history, where we look at BP's reaction to their oil spill, or we sort of reflect on some of the monitoring around, I guess, Tesla's growth and leadership experiences that might occur internally and be leaked onto the outside. As a Jacinda Ardern, tragic and fan in terms of leadership lessons that she shares. There are a lot of stories, that we can reflect on and experience that highlight just how much leadership can have an impact, not just on business effectiveness, but that brand and identity that we do have internally and externally. And most of the time, headlines do come from an angle of there's something wrong here and they need to do something about it. And so I guess that's where I thought I'd start a little bit, from a sense of a return on investment, where, as with most inventions that do arise over time, and some of the more innovative shifts that happen in the world, it starts from a place of pain as opposed to positive thinking. And I guess from that essence, where we sort of do think about, some of the big picture macro studies that we could look at that think about, where we do experience dysfunctional leadership, where are the actual pain points that business experience these? So if we're thinking about tapping into the language and thinking about the factors that we're going to be shifting through our leadership development, and therefore building an expectation that this is going to help our business, a lot of the time there will be things that happen, a bit more closer to home, where we do hear the feedback coming out of Parliament House that will trigger a review. It will trigger an intervention of some description because there's some level of pain being experienced. So Shins and Schilling in 2013, so it is 8 years old, but what we tried to look at were meta-analyses that actually find and source reputable studies to actually pull them together to find some global findings, so that people like us can be confident that the advice that we're giving, the interventions that we're implementing, are moving the needle in the right space. And so the feedback there is that, destructive leadership behaviors that we are probably more attuned to through headlines, where the aggressive behaviors, that sense of bullying, or not letting other people speak up, or pushing opinions onto others, really do contribute to tangible results in these areas of absenteeism, so unplanned leave and extended leave, that sense of turnover, where so a colleague, Dr. Ian Haslam, gave a webinar a couple of months ago that did look at the cost of the wrong hire, and that taps into the cost of losing good people. So it's the lower effectiveness is very relatable, where people find themselves working for a destructive leader, take a long time to do traditional tasks, to make decisions through the double checking and the questioning themselves, and the need to debrief, all affects that overall effectiveness. Mental health, in terms of that ability to be resilient and having somebody to coach and reframe us when we're going through tough times, and then actually also being a source or a trigger of mental health challenges in and of itself. And then what usually would sort of come out through engagement surveys, culture surveys, and satisfaction surveys, is a level of resistance or negative attitudes towards a leader. And it's the combination of these, I guess, pain points that would lead to the conclusion in the meta-analyses that, this is from an American study, 2.38 billion a year to cost the business, through destructive leadership. So closer to home, although our businesses aren't as high, the impact is felt just as proportionately in our businesses. And where we might come from a perspective where there's not just pain points, but they're to avoid through leadership development, but really from a more strategic perspective, there's gain points, things that we're really wanting to see a shift in that's going to improve our business position. So that's where we've got, the revenue that can be brought in by businesses, the profit margin, the satisfaction of employees, their engagement and willingness to go the extra mile, their productivity or effectiveness in terms of time taken to undertake particular tasks, the retention of good people and the growth of good people. So those gain points on the left side is where some of the later research is honed in on, and then the longer term research into, I guess, the benefits does tap into that sense of there's health and safety incidents, how people do use and respect the resources of their employer, collaborating across teams, across divisions, and even across industries affected by leadership effectiveness, and as is mental health, which is really something that's always been affected and had a genuine impact on our business performance, effectiveness, and longevity, but definitely getting more spotlight through the COVID experience that we're sharing across the world. And just to hone in a little bit, and I suppose in terms of sharing the next slides, it's honing in on some of the particular studies that do look at return on investment into leadership, I guess with an intent to give us both some confidence about the level of impact that effective leadership has and therefore the benefits of developing it, but also some ways of framing return on investment that might be helpful for us in our businesses where we're looking at evaluation techniques. I'm going to sort of skim over that bit because you could argue that there's there's a sense that a webinar in and of itself could be how we do go about to measure the return on investment of our leadership development programs. And there's some particular readings that did contribute to this session that have some good techniques that can be used, and happy to share them if people are interested after the session. So I guess where Zanger and Folkman is probably, the publishers of The Extraordinary Leader is one of the more well-known across the world. And I know locally too, in terms of talking to leaders, there's many concepts that are used and thrive today in a coaching and leadership environment. Where we're looking at this graph is really tapping into some of the research that they did a few years ago. There would be a 360-degree survey is the way that they decided which leaders met the great leadership benchmark, middle or good leadership benchmark, or bottom. And so through 360-degree feedback from direct leader, peers, and followers to reach a level of leadership effectiveness. And then they take the top 10% scorers to see, and this was in a mortgage business, I guess the pure net income that they're producing, versus the leaders that were at the bottom 10%. And the figures are extraordinary, to use their language, and it really does speak to, I guess, the intuition that our top 10% of leaders can have a disproportionate impact on the overall effectiveness of our business. And I guess in terms of an insight from this is where there are sometimes some perspectives on how we might go about rating or ranking our leaders. Many businesses will use some form of a 9-box or talent matrix approach to start to identify the effectiveness of leaders, and then particular tactics to take when where they might be in terms of that at level, with potential or performing well above level. And so I think those techniques bring credibility in terms of that sense that focusing on that top line, high effective leaders for retention can definitely have a significant impact on business performance, and lends itself to the types of tactics that might be implemented to bring up or move those leaders who might be below, I guess, the standard that we're setting at that leadership level, and supporting that most of our leaders will be in the middle. and the significant impact that they deliver is also extremely important to be nurturing and recognizing, reporting, and seeing the dial shift. We also look at a study World Management Survey undertaken by Harvard Business School, Stanford University, MIT, London School of Economics. So really large scale survey with over 12,000 businesses across the world. So, and look what they were looking at too. So we're seeing this top 10%, bottom 10%, really looking at what's the differences around the effectiveness of management practices. So I guess for me, when looking at the literature, management practices speaks mostly to that middle management level of leadership. And again, the findings that they report and they share, again, really quite huge when we're sort of thinking about what the sizes of our own business. But I guess what I'm really trying to push here is the trend line and the significance of impact by that their highest performing leaders can achieve, creating the importance of getting them there. And I would also highlight that although I'm speaking to leaders and building the greatest leaders, I think it's important to appreciate that what those effective leaders do is bring their brilliance into the team, and they're undertaking interventions with their team to build the effectiveness of teams, rather than taking a hero perspective that a great leader can be a great leader anywhere and you plug them in. So context matters a lot. So this speaks to the importance of measuring in our own context and environment regularly. So if there is that succession planning methodology in play, that can be a lever to help checking the return on investment and effectiveness of the leadership development practices. Really important and helpful input to understand why people might shift on that 9-box matrix when you start to shift them across teams or divisions. So I guess what the key things here is where we do look at productivity and growth and the profit at the end of the day that helps a business survive, all see significant lifts at the higher echelon of leaders, which does create that sense of creating leadership brilliance as a key piece of our culture and performance strategy is a credible one. And in another sort of study, so Lyon in 2014, and there's some, if you were to Google this one, there's a good blog for free. There are some resources that are associated with it as well. But I particularly like this one because for ourselves, we do quite a lot of work in the frontline leadership arena, and the 3 areas that the frontline leadership development program focused on in this context was I'd sort of use that language that the sort of mate to manager journey, or from friend to frontline. So there is that sense of frontline leaders need help to really start to own what it's like to be a leader and a manager now, because I never used to be. I used to be one of the friends and had a different relationship with people. So a program focusing on building that sense of identity as a frontline leader and what it means, and then building on that in terms of that sense of giving feedback and recognizing the behaviors that are helping the team, and also bringing the team to a consistent set of priorities. They were the 3 key focus areas of this training. And so where it was rolled out to 2,000 first-time managers, which would be at the front line, that's where they essentially had a group of people who didn't receive the training and compared that against a group who did receive the training. And that was a key piece of the equation used that is shared in the free blog that Leon has to be able to articulate that we were pretty much achieving 4 times, or 400% return on investment for the groups that did receive the training versus those that weren't. One of the key frameworks that we do use is the full range leadership model, which is free intel because it's independently researched, and some of the targeted case studies behind that show similar results in, say, a finance industry, where they have had the opportunity to check the performance of leadership groups who receive training in that full range leadership model behaviors, and those that have it, to really highlight the impacts that it can have in customer service, income, revenue, profitability, that can start to articulate, I guess, the return on investment that we're getting from our leaders. So I guess to wrap up the first point around return on investment, we're throwing some figures at you just to build that sense of comfort and confidence to say, yeah, leadership development has credible literature behind it, that it delivers real results to business. We can sometimes be limited and affected by some of the processes that we already have, just as to how sensitive we can be to tracking the return on investment. So at a lower scale, where we would often have, whether it be a 360-degree survey pre-post or an engagement survey that's deliberately timed and structured to be able to notice shifts in particular cohorts or teams that have been part of a particular program. One of the things that we've introduced to our Frontline Trusted Leader program, is a session at the conclusion that helps our leaders, again, flex the storytelling muscle that's so important to influencing leadership. But it's also sharing back the impact that the program has had on them, their team, and the business. And that's where you can get some really powerful stories around, what's been on the ground impact of this program for our leaders and our people. And if we do invite a senior leader to that session too, who has sponsored the session, they actually start to hear the stories of impact. And the stories that are shared might be in that sort of range of, in my team, we're having the conversations that we could never have before, which means we're getting things done in 2 weeks that used to take 4. There's other stories where people say, I never felt like I belonged as a leader in this place, and now I do, and I'm not leaving. So that reflects the turnover stories. So there's qualitative and quantitative, and although I'm a stronger fan of quantitative data to provide business case and track progress and performance, humans relate more to stories. And so if you've got the combination of both, that's where it's more likely to help us to consistently deliver the return on investment that the business really needs out of every dollar that we invest into leadership. So there's some, I guess, some key hints or tips there. I'm not sure if there are any questions that might thread through, or even other comments that might be added about particular techniques used to capture return on investment or experiences. I guess the other area that we often find at a smaller enterprise level, where every leader has a disproportionate impact on business performance because of the small leadership pool, there's often a focus on, can they carry the culture forward with them, so that as an owner of the business, I can focus on continually building the business and have a leadership group that's helping to build the culture that got us as far as we did. So again, more of a qualitative impact that will have visible results in that aspect of retention, client experience, employee experience, if we do measure that. Okay. So I guess moving beyond the return on investment, I guess share or information. I sourced this quote because something I tend to find myself saying at the moment is, from a leader or culture and leadership development perspective, we can find ourselves overestimating what we can achieve in a year, but really underestimate what we can achieve in 3. And by that I mean, there's often that when something starts or triggers the opportunity to invest in our culture and leadership, there can be a lot of activity in that first year, and that can lead to an overestimation of what we're going to achieve. And it can also lead to an overinvestment. So if we take more of a 3-year perspective, what we're trying to articulate is that where we're headed is where we need to get to. And if we're strategic about each of these steps, it will become more sustainable, and we create an environment that actually pulls a business through in terms of culture and leadership development interventions. So I went back to Alfred Mayo in 1969, who worked for NASA, sharing that particular quote. And there's something similar by Bill Gates, and one day mine quote might be there. But I guess in terms of positioning this, where there's the return on investment side, where we need to really clearly articulate these are the outcomes and benefits that we need to hit the business. And I would sort of say An outcome is a direct result of the leadership development. And when that result can have an impact on something key to our business strategy or business plan, that's where we call it a benefit. So you'll often find that there's a chain of outcomes that contribute to that strategic focus area for a business that leads us to a benefit. The other perspective that is really helpful from a business case perspective is being able to map out or put it on a page, where we're taking leadership. Yeah. So I guess this is an adaptation on my behalf a little bit from some of the methods that we might use in a culture development setting, because I find a similar challenge experienced in culture as in leadership, where we know it's important, we know we need to invest in it. We might have feedback or reviews undertaken that said culture needs fixing, leadership needs improving, but with little help in terms of how to map it out or where to go. So from a leadership development strategy perspective, here's just an idea or a way of potentially framing a 3-year journey. So I guess in this sense, what I've sort of kicked off here, I guess, is something that we found to be really quite critical in working with clients in leadership. It's being reinforced by a lot of the identity leadership research being led out at University of Queensland, and it's also being brought to the forefront through, I guess, Coyle's the Culture Code book. That's a really easy read that is quite relatable and taps into a lot of the concepts that are shared in research. And so I guess one of the key sort of themes or focus areas, and there might be particular values that a business has that gives you a better language, but one of the things that we really try to emphasize in leadership is that creating connection is critical in terms of building or leveraging the capacity of bringing people together to learn, creates a safe environment, which creates trust, and therefore can break down silos across a business. It strengthens psychological safety so that people are more likely to speak up, more likely to speak about mental health matters, more likely to find creative options to difficult problems, which is really what we need from our leaders every day. So there's a theme, that needs to be pushed through how we structure our leadership development program, and then how we measure it. So psychological safety is something, that can arguably, well, is it different to trust? What I like about psych safety is it's a construct. We can measure it easily, we can track it easily and cheaply. So I like it. The other aspect is that we're looking at habits. So the power of habit is something I came across through neuromarketing. When neuroscience was newer to leadership development and coaching, marketing was years ahead of HR and psychology in terms of consumer behavior and habits. So not dissimilar in a leadership setting or a culture setting is that if we're deliberately using language, tools and frameworks that reduce friction and create consistency across context and leadership levels, our brains find it easier to adopt on board, and it becomes contagious. And so I guess the key habit that I like to share and speak about, that's definitely pertinent right now, is where we shared in a book called Beyond the Glass Ceiling, which is just a really powerful question to ask, where people might be out of line and saying something that might be sexist or derogatory towards another group. What do you mean by it? What is it that you mean by that? When you say that, what do you mean? Easier question to ask without judgment, lightly. And if you've got power in a relationship or reputation or trust, it can have a really big impact on starting to shift some ways of thinking. So that's a good example of a habitual question that we need people to feel safe to ask at every level. And then the other piece is identity, in a sense that the opportunity for leaders and teams to start recognizing the identity that they share by being a part of your business and what that means is a way of helping to achieve those fringe benefits from a mental health perspective, in that the more identities that we have as a human, the more psychologically resilient we can become. That's in and outside of the workplace. And then there's also an opportunity to build a stronger sense of pride by being a part of a bigger group or an organization. So at Mappian, we refer to each other as Mappians, and sort of to appreciate that we're all professionals in our own right in different teams, but one of the key reasons that brings us here is that global culture that we share as Mappians. So that shared identity means, regardless of the team I work in or the project I'm working on, there's a way of doing things here that brings us together, attracts people to us, and might also turn people away. And that's okay, because we can't be everything to everybody. So just keeping an eye on time, I should speed up a little bit. And that's where they're the key themes and the way of thinking. We move into the first phase, and it's often this first year, be it a new chief executive, a new structure, a merger, a particular review or report that's triggered, a program of work that's starting to appreciate we need to shift this culture. And so there's a set of activities that happen in terms of we define the vision, and this is where, as a business, to survive, where are we headed towards, why do we exist, and what are the values that we require to be successful, not the aspirational ones. So I really love the sort of work by Coyle around the culture code to really articulate what we mean by core values. And then there's an element of, one way is to tell people what we do and who we are and how we will behave, and that will encourage a particular behavior. If we're looking for connections, habits, and identity, it's important that it's aligned with our systems, processes. Teams get an opportunity to check and understand and make sense of them and challenge them. And then there's this, then we start to develop, our leaders and align with the vision, the purpose, the values, and where we need to be moving to as a business. And that implementation can be, it can often be a launch of particular values, a refresh of particular programs. People use that human synergistics system where we're starting to articulate where we're heading and why, and this is how we're measuring it. And we look for ways to reduce friction by, is the performance management system aligned? Are our PDs aligned? Is our succession planning system aligned? So there's a lot of levers that start to be pulled to work in line. Leadership is one of those. And it's unlikely that we can achieve transformation in 1 year unless it's coupled with environmental factors and a lot of push and drive at the executive level and project level. But essentially what that does is creates the baseline, sets the direction, and gives people what they need to be on that journey, which would then sort of trigger into the next year, which is more informed about, this is where we said we must go to succeed. And we've been listening, building over the last year. And for us, the most critical theme or critical behavior or critical focus point for us is X. And this is where we want to make it easier for people to hone in on what's most important to us now. And an example that comes to mind is where the economic environment for businesses can change rapidly, and that need for change leadership is key. So you might have a theme that starts to push, commercial thinking. That's what we need from top to bottom in terms of asking why, is there a better way? Can we do this more efficiently? Reliability. So we start to build an identity around that key theme. Or is that key theme about having the difficult conversations? So it needs to be something that's relevant to performance and culture. So it connects the dots between our behavior. So you take culture, switch culture with behavior. This behavior matters most and is most critical for us in our business right now. And how does that program support it? By stepping through that phase, we then find ourselves into the third horizon, where if we've undertaken the first two levels well, in inverted commas, and so what you'll find is the second year, there might be another move through the actual definition, alignment, and development activities that are happening to consistently refine and align. We then actually start to create or receive a bit of a pull from the business. So it becomes less about a leader who's sponsoring leadership and culture or the people and culture team really driving the initiatives, but finding themselves now being pushed and led by leaders saying, we need to do this. We need to find a way to reduce error reduction, or our warranty period is really killing us as a business. We need to find a way to drive quality, and get things right the first time. And it's this language that really starts to shape a program that is actually co-designed, co-delivered, often by leaders for leaders, and can be even more focused on teams, where leaders might start to say, how can we bring the experiences that we've had to our team so that they can benefit? It's not all about me as a leader, it's about us. So that third year is where we want to see the unification of the social identity coming into play, where people are really looking for ways to bring the teams into the program, and how can I do more, because it becomes quite a strong part of our culture. So that as a concept, where you can have a theme for each year, starts to articulate and give a sense of where we're at and what we're doing now, where that activity is, and what we can start to do to push it through. And so that can also help rationalize some of the budgets that we might or might not have. And sort of one of the quick wins that we sort of worked with a client on recently was where a new capability matrix or a new leadership framework that can take time, money, and effort, that doesn't necessarily deliver immediate return on investment. So what we looked at over that 3-year phase was, well, let's use evidence-based literature to articulate what that capability framework should be in terms of what works in your types of businesses with your types of leaders, to have an impact. And I've got an example in the next section. And as we deliver that program, let's invest small but meaningful effort into feedback from leaders in terms of what we need from our executives, what we need from our middle leaders, what we need from our frontline, what we need from future leaders. We're gathering that feedback, and essentially what we're doing is piggybacking delivery while people are in that leadership mindset to be giving us feedback to construct a customized capability framework. So less effort, less cost, high effort, and aligns with an important philosophy is that we must use evidence-based principles and guides to drive what interventions we implement, but then we've got to track them to make sure they're working and adapt them if they're not, because our context is usually unique in some way or another, and tinkering is always needed away what we get out of evidence-based focus points. So I guess the next piece, I'm sort of transitioning out of that quite quickly. Any questions, Alex? Thoughts, comments, jokes?
No jokes from me. In terms of the one of the questions we had earlier was about that 3-year cycle and whether the sort of new cycles coming off that, is it a variation on the old cycle, or is it something where you would reset your strategic direction moving forward and then realign your desired leadership behaviors to that?
Good question. It's one that I struggle to put in a diagram like this, in that it looks linear, but I guess the circular piece, and it's probably some extra arrows, but it is that aspect of there is a lot of effort at one point in time where a significant change creates a new sense of direction, and that's where that will usually warrant an opportunity to invest in leadership. And then there's a lot of activity that happens. So even though the next year is looking to be more refined on a particular theme, behavior, or focus point, or that might even be your starting point, there's still a need to make sure the feedback that we're getting, that value around excellence isn't sitting and fitting. It's actually sending the wrong message. We need to reframe it, or we need to remove it, or we need to change it. So that's part of the process. There's an iteration, that sort of threads through, because we're going to get new people joining the business in this year who weren't a part of that first year. So what are those types of interventions that we're using to help people beyond that culture journey? Is it part of the onboarding program, that's supporting that? Is it part of the leader induction or a shadowing experience, so that people get the war stories faster than they usually do? Okay. Thanks, Alex. And I've probably got to speed up a little bit now because I'm mindful of time, and it's sort of an hour. I'm trying to sort of wrap up for 11:45, 11:50, so that we've got enough time to refresh and get to our next session and reflect on what a brilliant experience we've just had. But then the other area that I wanted to share was really, I guess, some of the key learnings and insights that we've sort of building around just the different pain points at leadership level, and how it's so important to incorporate into a leadership development strategy and to maximize the likelihood of getting the return on investment and hitting those outcomes that we need in a business case. So no rocket science here, other than that sense of we're looking at that pipeline, the talent pipeline, people at different levels. When people join our business at an entry level, we really need them to be building a self-awareness, then acting on it. When people are part of a team and they're well attuned to the team, that's where we need them to be really aware of the team and doing something with that information. Then when we hit that front leader space, that's where we're needing to help leaders own that role, go from a friend to the frontline level. The area that we're probably noticing more of at the moment that's been untapped is the middle managers. It can often be 2 or 3 tiers, but it's often a sense where people have had to work really hard to get into that middle management echelon. They often then find themselves that I've finally gotten into this role and I'm much less influential than I thought I was going to be, because now my role's moving from a lot about helping the hands-on frontline get stuff done and resolving issues through to now there's more complex politics coming down from that senior executive level of leadership, and those really tough people issues that can't be resolved within a team. I've got to deal with that, and I'm actually having really limited time to influence. And so the untapped resource is how are we uniting that management layer as a team of influence in the business to really help to, a lot of my clients will say we need them to lift that level of leadership. And that means uniting as that level of team. So we're more focused on the business and on our function. And that echoes the similar focus at the executive team level. That can often be that sense of how do we help that executive team prioritize the business and its needs and strategy and future, and less about the function I'm accountable for. So I'm talking to this rather quickly, because I just wanted to make sure that we step through some of and just throw a question out there too, and is that sense of, if we're looking at leveling leadership development programs and we're looking at the front line of what they need most, the first question is, well, where's the pain? So I guess the question I've got is, when you think about your own businesses, what is the pain points for your frontline leaders? If you wanted to pop it in the chat, write it down, think about it. Again, from the sentiment that, most people do things because of pain, not because they might get a good result. So if we hone in on the pain, that's where we can start to construct programs that are likely to achieve quicker wins and have a greater impact. Anything coming through, Alex?
Yeah, so something coming through. So pain points for frontline leaders, so the sort of resistance and attitude towards new leaders. So I'm guessing that's from potentially the team they might have moved up from.
Yep, absolutely. And that is the classic friend of frontline, and I guess when we think about some of the pre-prepared ones, that's tapping into the used to be one of us, and now you're not, so that's difficult for the team that they're frontlining, but also for themselves personally. And this sort of sentiment that, am I really a leader? I kind of feel like the chief of everything now, and this is really new. So it's the transition period. Finding more time is spent on the troubles and the problems, as opposed to the usual hits of achievement. And that achievement's what usually gets me that first leadership opportunity. And kind of that sense that most problems are people problems. And so we kind of go, well, let's build something that's toning in on those pain points. And this was just an example of where you might have your own capability framework, you might not. You might be looking to develop it. The Bassanvolio full range leadership model is a really great piece of IP, that is freeware because it's independently reviewed. There are tools that you can use to evaluate it, of course, but it points in the right direction. It aligns with the Leon return on investment, where we focused on adjusting to the role. We focused on getting teams to focus on the priorities of the behavior and recognize their efforts, and that's what helped us achieve a 400% return on investment. So that echoes beautifully from a full range leadership model, in that the painkiller, for our frontliners is make it as practical as possible. Give me stuff that I can use immediately. And in fact, if I can use it in the room, and I'll be more likely to use it tomorrow. Honing in on that sense of what does it mean to be a leader now? These emotions are affecting me more, and probably some of the other people I'm experiencing more. The difficult conversations are increasing. Give me some tools, tips, tricks, and experiences around that. I really need to get better at giving feedback. And that's about frequency and effectiveness, and performance management in terms of how do I keep people humming, and people who are starting to fall behind. What are the steps that I can confidently and comfortably do before calling in HR all the time? So that's the focus of our Trusted Leader program. Connects with the leadership model, connects with the 400% return on investment, to give peace of mind that we're really focusing on practical interventions.
There's just one more before we move on to the senior leader and middle management. A good comment from Gina as well. One of the pain points that you hadn't mentioned there was about letting go of that sort of dipping down and building that trust to delegate effectively with those people you work with. Really good point to raise, and definitely one that we see a lot of new leaders struggle with.
Delegate, absolutely. Perfect. Good stuff. Thank you, Gina. And sort of moving more swiftly than I'd like at the senior or middle management level. But I guess the key aspect here is, and I sort of deliberately primed it and mentioned it earlier in terms of that sense that that's using senior or middle managers, it will depend on the structure that you've got. But the middle echelon of leadership, they just find themselves quite isolated, less influential than we expected, when we set this ambition across. Meeting a lot and I'm not getting much done. And most conversations that I'm having, I need to be more assertive, I need to be stronger, or I'm getting feedback that I need to be less, aggressive or assertive. And so it's quite confusing. I haven't really got time to pause, refresh, and actually connect with some really practical ways to act on this feedback that I'm getting. So I guess there are programs that lift that Trusted Leader program up another level to sort of dig down more into performance management discipline and coaching and heighten, I guess, the effectiveness and mastery of those traditional management skills. The other area that we've found to be really quite powerful for the middle leaders, is this aspect of how do we create a space and environment where they are quicker to learn from the experiences that they've already got, and they actually build a sense that I'm not as isolated as I thought. I'm really proud of my function that I'm leading, and the team that teams that I'm across. But actually, my peers have an amazing level of experience, and together we can achieve much more. So what are we doing from a program perspective to create a sense of identity for them? What are we doing to sort of create a culture? I call it a management culture, because that's leadership culture is above it, the exact management culture in the middle, in terms of how we operate and behave when we hit this middle management level, to increase that sense of pride and ability to influence upwards, downways, to get the business where it needs to be, to actually maintain that momentum. And then that we can measure it and track it and give feedback to sort of get a sense for our middle managers. We're actually building a change coalition, and we're actually becoming one of the more influential groups in this business. And that's where what we sort of see behaviorally is that we need a stronger focus on purpose than focusing on our own patch. We really need to embrace and move into conflict than run away from it, or try to strong arm it. We kind of got to unite with our peers as opposed to try to beat them, so it's about joining them, not beating them. Getting into that space, and it was something that Gina mentioned earlier, in that sense of how do I get better at overseeing the outcomes, because some people can move into hands-on, head down, do tasks that give me a hit of achievement when I'm under threat. But how do we keep them at that level of management, cultural leadership, to keep things moving forward, and using everybody's abilities within the team? And ultimately, the cliche of collaboration, in terms of where across that management level, sacrifice is often one of those culture behaviors where I might give up a little so that the overall team can progress forward, is often a really hard hoary chestnut to crack. So that's where we can often find like a mentoring program in that middle level is a very powerful and cost-effective way to actually unlock some of the brilliance we've already got at that leadership level, and get some more peer coaching happening as mentoring the business. And then the other key piece of development we see in this space is difficult conversations, just really understanding what is it that I'm doing habit-wise to create the psychological safety or trust with me and my team, whether you're beside me or below me, that you can very much speak up and share with me whatever needs to happen. And I can do the same in a way that's appropriate and reasonable to continue us moving forward where we need to be. And then finally, the other level of leadership is at the executive level, where we've got our CEO and executive leadership team who have often, they have worked extremely hard to get where they are. They've often been through quite a lot of development. They often have had war stories across the way. And the pain point, I suppose, here, I really like the work by Patrick Lencioni, published in The Advantage, that really speaks strongly to, I guess, the challenges for executives in that. He uses this term, the first team dilemma, which is one of the challenges for an executive team is that when we come together, we're busy, there's usually quite a bit of stress, and I need to fight for my function and make sure that my function's getting what they need to operate. And the switch in culture is actually, it's our business, which is our number one team. And if we start thinking that way, it levels up our direct reports to be operating at a higher level of functioning because they're taking more ownership over the function than we are. And we start to make decisions in the interest of the business more so. And it bringing to the surface that the disproportionate impact of executives on a culture, it needs to be nurtured, recognized, and acknowledged. And you'll see in culture surveys, the perceptions at the exec level are much different to middle manager and much different to frontline and much different to teams because of the differences of experiences from day to day. The influence is quite tremendous. When you're an executive, people give you more time to speak. They laugh at your jokes. They kind of want your job. So all of that starts to affect, can affect the way that we see reality and the influence that we do have. And so creating a leadership culture that's really focused on, and again, it's sort of pulling from Lencioni's work here, just some really 6 critical questions that he refers to that are really powerful to drive, I guess, a leadership culture program at that executive level, which is not really about training and development. It is more about facilitation and building that culture where we are, no matter who you talk to in the executive, we are consistently on the same page about why we exist as a leadership team, how we operate and behave, role models that culture, what it is that we actually do as a business, our core business that we need to be effective at to keep ourselves in business, what the key strategic focus areas are that we must achieve to be successful in this market. What's really the most important thing for us and our people right now, that sharp focus. And then from a structural perspective, division wise, who must do what, so that we can achieve these outcomes. So high recommendation for the Lencioni work to help construct us that executive level program. And one of the things that we've noticed over the past 12 months is a stronger focus on leadership team development as opposed to team development, and possibly the traditional leadership programs that were undertaken pre-COVID. Still evolving and shifting now, but the level of leadership and intervention is probably more important than ever. So gone about 3 minutes over the personal goal, and I guess the wrap up from a reflection perspective is, that hopefully we walk away from today with a sense of, I guess, some clearer, some research examples of return on investment behind leadership development, a way of framing a 3-year focus over one in terms of to give us that sense of direction so that by that year 2, it's much easier for us to be driving change at each level of leadership. And then also the other piece is, targeting the pain points that do emerge at the different leadership levels. Yeah. So that's the end of the webinar, and I absolutely appreciate how precious everybody's time is right now, and definitely encourage you to reach out. We'll be in touch after the session to share with you the white paper recording if you sought it, and I'll be here until for any questions, but appreciate people might need to run off and head off and do what they need to do for the rest of the day. Alex, anything from you?
Just to say thank you. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for your insights, Blake. That's it's really good, and I think those common stresses that we see across different levels of leadership are just that they're common across all organizations. So appreciate, especially if you don't have any questions, even just sending us send us an email, get in contact if you have any examples of this happening in your workplace, and any good strategies for targeting those pain points. We always love to hear about what's worked for you guys. So do reach out, and love to have a chat.
Awesome. Excellent. Thanks, Alex, and thanks everybody. Stay safe wherever you are. Take care.